The morning of September 12, 1942, Charter Towers Airfield, Queensland, Australia. The heat rippled off the tarmac like a mirage, blurring the line between land and sky. A Douglas A-20 Havoc light bomber rolled toward a makeshift hangar built from corrugated tin and wartime desperation. Inside that hangar stood a 43-year-old man with grease-stained hands and eyes that burned with fury and purpose. His name was Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn, a name that would soon echo across the Pacific like the roar of a gunship. In just a few hours, the aircraft he'd personally modified would lead an assault on a Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. If his modifications worked, American bombers would finally have the firepower to rip through Japanese shipping and air bases. If they failed, men would die, and Gunn would be remembered as the eccentric fool who wasted precious time on a crazy idea. But Pappy wasn't thinking about failure. He was thinking about his wife and 4 children, prisoners of war held 1,700 miles away at Santo Tomas in Manila. He was thinking about the Japanese convoys slipping past American patrols, untouchable because no aircraft could fly low enough, slow enough, or hit hard enough to stop them. That morning, under the blistering Australian sun, he was thinking about vengeance and about survival. The man everyone called Pappy was about to turn a conventional medium bomber into something the Japanese had never seen before, a low-flying, ship-killing monster that could shred holes and silence anti-aircraft guns with torrents of lead. This wasn't the story of a genius engineer or cutting-edge technology. This was the story of a self-taught mechanic, a blacksmith's son from Arkansas, who used wrecked fighter planes, scrap metal, and pure determination to reshape the air war over the Pacific. The North American B-25 Mitchell bomber wasn't designed to be a gunship. When it rolled off the production line in 1941, it was meant to fly at medium altitudes, between 8,000 and 12,000 feet, dropping bombs with accuracy and efficiency. It was a solid, dependable aircraft. Twin Wright R-2600 engines, a wingspan of 67 feet, a top speed of 230 miles per hour, and a range of about 1,300 miles. It carried a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier navigator, radio operator, and 2 gunners, and relied on defensive turrets for protection rather than offensive firepower. Its namesake, Brigadier General Billy Mitchell, had once proved that airplanes could sink battleships. But in 1942, in the jungles of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, altitude and conventional bombing meant almost nothing. The jungle canopy swallowed bombs. Precision vanished in the tropical haze. Bombers flying at 10,000 feet often hit nothing but trees or ocean. Many of their bombs failed to detonate at all. Meanwhile, Japanese convoys slipped through at night, bringing supplies, men, and weapons to isolated garrisons across the vast Pacific. Submarines took a toll, but not enough. American air power needed a new weapon, something that could swoop in at wave-top height, rake ships and airfields with gunfire, and drop bombs that could skip across the water like stones before slamming into hulls below the waterline. The U.S. didn't have a single aircraft capable of that. The fighters, P-40 Warhawks and P-39 Airacrobras, were fast and agile, but lacked range and payload. The big 4-engine bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses, were too slow to maneuver and too valuable to risk at low altitude. The Douglas A-20 Havoc was promising but scarce. The only aircraft available in numbers was the B-25 Mitchell, dependable, plentiful, but built for an entirely different fight. The solution would come not from a factory or a design bureau, but from the mind of one relentless man. When Major General George C. Kenney arrived in Australia in August 1942 to take command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, he found his squadrons under-equipped and outmatched. He toured the ragged airfields of Queensland, searching for answers. That's when he found a grease-covered mechanic working in a tin shed at Charter Towers, an ex-Navy man tinkering with a light bomber like it was a hot rod. That man was Pappy Gunn. At 43, he was older than most pilots, rougher around the edges, and completely unbound by regulations. He had spent 21 years in the U.S. Navy as both mechanic and pilot, retiring in 1939 as a chief petty officer. He understood airplanes the way a blacksmith understands iron, by feel, by sound, by the way metal flexes under pressure. When the Japanese invaded the Philippines, he was there running Philippine Airlines. He'd flown supply missions under fire, rescued trapped pilots, even crash-landed in a coconut grove and walked away from it. But when Manila fell, his wife and children were captured and interned by the Japanese. That loss turned Pappy into something entirely else, a man consumed by purpose. So now at Charter Towers, surrounded by wrecked P-40s and Airacrobras, he began scavenging. He ripped .50 caliber Browning machine guns from destroyed fighters, fabricated mounts, and bolted them into the nose of an A-20 Havoc. He replaced the bombardier's glass with solid metal, built ammunition feeds by hand, and turned the light bomber into a 4-gun low-level strafer. It was crude, ugly, and lethal. On September 12, 1942, Gunn's modified A-20s took off for Buna, New Guinea, and changed air warfare forever. Flying just above the treetops, they raked the airfield with .50 caliber fire, then dropped parachute fragmentation bombs that floated gently down before exploding into clouds of steel and flame. Japanese planes burned on the ground. Fuel dumps detonated. The raid left the airfield a smoking ruin. General Kenny was astonished. The old mechanic had done what the engineer said was impossible. He'd built a gunship. And now Kenny had a new challenge for him. Do the same thing to the B-25.
Pappy Gunn was enormous. The A-20 Havoc had been a light bomber, smaller, simpler, and more forgiving to modify. The B-25 Mitchell, on the other hand, was a medium bomber, bigger, heavier, and far more complex. Adding heavy guns to its nose meant shifting its center of gravity forward, which could turn a steady bomber into an uncontrollable beast. The recoil from multiple .50 caliber guns could tear its frame apart if the mounts weren't reinforced. No engineer at North American Aviation would have dared attempt what Pappy was about to do. But Gunn didn't work for the factory. He worked for General George Kenny, a commander who cared less about rules and more about results. Assisting Gunn was Jack Fox, a North American Aviation technical representative stationed in Australia. Fox sent sketches of Gunn's proposed modifications back to the company's plant in Long Beach, California. The engineers were skeptical, even alarmed. They didn't have spare aircraft to experiment with, and the Pacific War couldn't wait for design committees. So, Gunn did what he always did. He improvised. Working with salvage parts, he stripped down a B-25, removed its bombardier station, and began bolting guns directly into the nose. At first, it was 4 Brownings, then 6, then 8. Every addition meant more firepower and more recoil. Gunn fabricated custom mounts from scrap steel, reinforced the nose structure with extra bracing, and rerouted electrical and ammunition feeds by hand. He tested everything himself, often taxiing out under the Queensland sun, firing short bursts into the red dirt beyond the airfield. The recoil kicked the nose like a mule, but the plane held together. The idea was working. While Gunn worked in Australia, Kenny pushed Washington for support. He wanted official approval to arm bombers for low-level attacks, but headquarters was hesitant. Doctrine dictated that bombers fly high, drop their payloads, and avoid enemy fire. Low-level strafing, they said, was suicide. But Kenny and Gunn had seen the Pacific firsthand. The jungle, the convoys, the ships hugging the coastlines under the cover of night. They knew that to win in New Guinea, they'd have to rewrite the rulebook. By late 1942, Gunn's modified B-25s were ready for testing. The nose bristled with machine guns, 8 forward-firing .50 calibers in the nose and cheek mounts, plus additional guns in the side blisters. Some versions even carried twin machine guns mounted under the cockpit, firing slightly downward to rake targets as the bomber approached at treetop height. In total, a fully gunized B-25 could unleash 14 .50 caliber machine guns in a single strafing pass, a storm of lead capable of cutting ships and trucks to pieces. The first combat test came not from a laboratory, but from necessity. In early 1943, Allied intelligence reported a large Japanese convoy moving along the northern coast of New Guinea, resupplying isolated garrisons. Gunn's modified B-25s joined conventional bombers for the strike. As the formation approached at low altitude, the Mitchells dove into the attack, their guns blazing. Streams of tracer fire ripped across the water, smashing into ships in gun positions before the enemy could react. Then came the new tactic Gunn had been developing: skip bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from altitude, the pilots released them at wavetop height. The 500-pound bombs skipped across the water like stones before slamming into the holes below the waterline, detonating inside the ships themselves. Japanese transports erupted in flame and smoke. In one coordinated run, the modified B-25s annihilated the convoy. The results were devastating and undeniable. General Kenny immediately ordered more conversions. Gunn, now officially the 5th Air Force's Special Projects Officer, turned the airfields of Queensland into makeshift factories. Under 10 roofs and in open fields, crews stripped B-25s, fitted new noses, installed gun mounts, and modified bomber racks to carry parafrag and skip bomb ordnance. Each aircraft was slightly different, a reflection of limited resources and constant improvisation, but each one carried the same lethal intent, to destroy anything that moved for the Japanese. As Gunn's reputation grew, so did his myth. Air crews called his creations flying buzzsaws and gunship Mitchells. Ground crews marveled at how quickly he worked. He seemed tireless, driven by something deeper than orders. What few of them knew was that Pappy's motivation wasn't medals or fame, it was his family. His wife Clara and their 4 children were still prisoners in Manila, slowly starving inside the Santo Tomas internment camp. Every B-25 he modified, every mission flown, every Japanese ship sunk brought him one step closer to them, or at least to the hope of ending the war before they died. Pappy barely slept. He lived at the airfields, working through the night with lantern light, grinding metal, drilling mounts, aligning barrels by eye. His men followed his example, their morale fueled by his obsession. He tested the planes himself, flying low over the ocean, strafing empty barges, and measuring gun spread with chalk lines on the water. His modifications turned out to be remarkably stable. The forward weight actually helped in low-level runs, keeping the nose steady during sustained fire. By early 1943, entire squadrons were equipped with the modified B-25s, now officially designated as B-25C and B-25D gunship variants. They were crude, but terrifyingly effective. Instead of lumbering through the sky, they now roared just above the waves, guns hammering, tracers streaming, bombs skipping into hulls. In the jungles of New Guinea, Allied soldiers could hear the distant thunder of those guns and knew that air support had arrived. The Japanese called them the low-flying devils. Convoys began to travel only at night, hugging the shadows of the coastline. Even then, they weren't safe. The B-25s could strike at dawn, coming in from the sea with the sun at their backs, invisible until it was too late. By the spring of 1943, Pappy Gunn's modified gunships had transformed the 5th Air Force from a struggling defensive outfit into a lethal offensive machine. They had turned the tide in the skies over New Guinea, and Pappy had done it with salvaged parts, intuition, and rage. By mid-1943, the skies over New Guinea belonged to the gunship B-25s. What had started as a back alley experiment in a tin shed had evolved into one of the most feared weapons in the Pacific. Pappy Gunn's hand-built monsters, bristling with as many as 14 50 caliber machine guns, were now leading entire squadrons into battle. Their signature attack profile became a thing of legend, roaring in at wave-top height, opening up with a wall of fire that shredded anti-aircraft guns, transports, and fuel dumps alike. The Japanese defenders, trained to fight high-flying bombers, were overwhelmed by the sheer aggression of these low-level assaults. The culmination came in March 1943 during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, a showdown that would cement Pappy Gunn's place in history. Allied reconnaissance spotted a massive Japanese convoy sailing from Rabaul to Leh, loaded with troops, supplies, and equipment meant to reinforce their New Guinea garrisons. It was a critical lifeline for Japan's southern campaign, and General Kenny intended to cut it. Over the next several days, waves of American and Australian aircraft took off from forward bases to intercept the convoy. At the heart of the strike force were Gunn's modified B-25s, the new generation of low-flying, hard-hitting gunships. As the formation approached, the sea below was crawling with Japanese transports and their destroyer escorts. Anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with black puffs of flak. The Mitchells came in low, so low that spray from the ocean streaked their wings. Then, with a thunderous roar, the gunships opened fire. 14 barrels erupted in synchronized fury, sending streams of tracers lashing across the water. Gun emplacements exploded, bridges disintegrated, the ship's decks turned into maelstroms of shrapnel and flame. Moments later, the B-25s released their bombs, skipping them across the surface like flat stones. The explosions ripped through hulls, tearing ships apart below the waterline. Within minutes, the convoy was in chaos. Transports burned from stem to stern. Destroyers veered wildly, trying to avoid collisions and aerial attacks. From above, the air was filled with smoke, debris, and the screams of twisted metal. The Japanese fleet that had once seemed unstoppable was being annihilated, not by battleships or submarines, but by a handful of modified bombers designed by a self-taught mechanic. When the smoke cleared, 8 Japanese transports and 4 destroyers lay at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Thousands of enemy troops were dead or dying. The survivors who tried to swim for shore were strafed by Allied aircraft to prevent their rescue. The battle was a decisive Allied victory and a personal vindication for Pappy Gunn and General Kenny. The gunship concept had worked beyond anyone's expectations. The B-25 Mitchell had become a weapon of terror for the Japanese, a flying saw blade of destruction that ruled the low altitudes of the Pacific. After Bismarck Sea, the U.S. Army Air Forces officially embraced the gunship idea. North American aviation began producing factory-modified B-25 variants, including the B-25G and B-25H, fitted with heavy cannon and multiple machine guns inspired by Gunn's original field conversions. These aircraft were even more specialized for low-level attacks, some carrying a 75mm cannon in addition to their machine guns. But the core DNA of those designs, the aggressive low-altitude firepower concept, was born in that corrugated tin hangar in Queensland in the hands of Pappy Gunn. As the war continued, Gunn remained a restless force of innovation. He developed new bomb racks, improved gun mounts, and refined skip bombing techniques. He worked closely with combat pilots, adjusting each aircraft based on their feedback after every mission. His motto was simple: if it saves lives and kills the enemy faster, do it. Under his guidance, the 5th Air Forces became one of the most adaptive, inventive fighting forces in the entire U.S. military. But while his machines were saving lives and winning battles, Pappy's heart carried a different kind of weight. His wife and 4 children remained imprisoned in Manila, enduring starvation, disease, and abuse at the hands of their captors. Every report from the Philippines deepened his determination. His fury was not just patriotic, it was personal. Each Japanese convoy sunk, each airfield destroyed, was his way of fighting for them, of clawing back some measure of control over a war that had stolen his family. When American forces finally liberated the Philippines in 1945, Pappy Gunn's family was among those freed from Santa Tomas. They had survived, frail but alive. The war that had driven him to the edge of madness was finally over. For Pappy, victory didn't bring celebration. It brought exhaustion. He had spent every ounce of himself in that war, trading sleep, comfort, and peace for innovation and vengeance. After the war, Gunn returned to the Philippines, helping rebuild Philippine Airlines and continuing to work in aviation. He never sought fame for his wartime achievements, though he received numerous decorations, including the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star. To him, the real reward was that his men came home alive and his family was safe again. In 1957, Paul Pappy Gunn was killed in a civilian plane crash in the Philippines. He was 57 years old. His death went largely unnoticed outside of military circles, but among those who had flown his gunships, his legend never faded. They remembered the grease-stained hands, the sleepless nights, the relentless drive of a man who refused to accept what the manuals said was impossible. They remembered the roar of the Mitchells thundering in at wave-top height and the way those gunships turned the tide of the Pacific War. Today, when historians talk about the evolution of close air support and low-level attack tactics, they trace a direct line back to Pappy Gunn. He proved that ingenuity, desperation, and sheer will could change the course of a global conflict. The B-25 Mitchell was never meant to be a gunship, but because of one man's fury, it became a 14-gun monster that tore through convoys, crushed airfields, and helped bring down an empire.
And all of it began in that hot, dusty hangar in Queensland with a man, a wrench, and an idea powerful enough to reshape the sky.